I'm very excited to introduce our upcoming keynote presenter, Susan Stith, Cigna's Vice President of Diversity, Inclusion, and Civic Affairs. A little bit about Susan before we let her jump right in here today. Welcome, Susan. Susan is responsible for shaping and steering Cigna's enterprise-wide diversity, equity, inclusion, philanthropic, and community outreach programs. Susan has been honored by numerous national publications and organizations such as Black Enterprise's Top Executives in Corporate Diversity, Diversity Plus Magazine's Top 25 Women Impacting Diversity, and Diversity Women's Top 50 Diversity Champions. In the face of unprecedented challenges due to the coronavirus pandemic, systemic racism, and widespread social unrest in 2020, Susan helped bring to life two very important programs demonstrating Cigna's continued commitment to health equity and equality. And today she's going to tell you a little bit about those in her session titled Why Inclusion, Belonging, and Equity Are More Important Than Ever. So without further ado, Susan, I will have you take it away today.
Good morning, good afternoon, whatever time zone we're in, whatever weather you're experiencing, welcome. I am so excited and honored to be here. So with that, I'm hoping my slides are going to, thank you. I was wondering where they were, hoping my slides would come up. You know, I've sat in on a couple of sessions today, and I have to tell you, this has been amazing. So to the Opal team, to Charlene, to all of those who put this together, thank you. It has been a great session so far. I'm thoroughly enjoying myself. You know, you mentioned some of the work that I'm doing, and I think that we could all attest that we're living through historic times in our country, in our companies, and in our personal lives. And so let me start by saying that I've been doing this work for a long time in multiple industries, and never has the sense of urgency and need been as great as it is today. In fact, I heard one of the speakers a minute ago talk about the threats that we're experiencing. And I like to say that we're actually living through triple threats or triple pandemics at this time, from COVID-19 and the vaccination rollout to systemic racism and the widespread social unrest to economic and political uncertainty. It really has been a year quite like no other. And you notice I said a year quite like no other, even though we're in February, because I also like to say that we're actually in the fifth quarter of 2020. So this past year and the year that we're in is truly the definition of VUCA. And some of you may have heard that term before. VUCA is volatile, uncertain, chaotic, and ambiguous. And I think that we could all attest to that. As an African-American woman, I'm especially aware of this powerful and poignant time in our history. You know, we're just coming off the heels of Dr. King's birthday. And I think that so much of what Dr. King espoused 50 years ago is true and relevant today, from belonging, which I'm going to spend some time talking about, to racial healing, to social justice, and serving others. And serving others means also, how do we take care of ourselves? And how do we take care of our communities in order to build, to grow, and create sustainable work around the world? And so we're kicking off also at Cigna what we call Black Futures Month. And many of you, we all call it Black History as well. But in order to plan for your future, you have to really know what your past is. But we also have to think in terms of what is it that we want to do, and really want to look at what our future is. And so with all of that backdrop, I want to say that that change starts with self. And that's where I'm going to spend some time. So with that, can we flip to the second slide? So you're looking at this, and you probably remember back in the day when we could fly. Many of us haven't. I haven't flown on a plane since March 12th of 2020. And as you look at this and you think about this work that we're experiencing in this time that we're in, we're seeing this confluence of home and personal lives and work. And as you can probably see, I'm working from my home office right now, and there's truly a merger that we're seeing. And it may be for the foreseeable future, even with the vaccination. But it is so important that we have a sense of resilience. And resilience starts, to be perfectly honest, with an understanding of what it is to belong within your community and within your organization. So There was a study that was done a few years ago by Harvard Business Review that said that belonging is good for business. And workers that belong, in companies that workers belong, companies reap a substantial bottom line benefit. High belonging has been linked to 56% increase in job performance, a 50% increase or decrease, in turnover risk, and a 75% reduction in sick days. So I want you to do the math and imagine you're with a company that has 10,000 people. With those three stats that I shared, those three stats represent a whopping $52 million in savings. So multiply that with a company of our size or a company of some of your other size. Our company is about 70,000 people across the world. So think about the savings when individuals belong. At the end of the day, excluding individuals is truly about self-sabotaging. We did a study not too long ago that's called the Cigna Resilience Index. And in that index, what we learned is that creating an environment and culture of inclusion, of exposure and awareness of cultural competency and diversity, and building quality relationships, those are key drivers to resilience at home and at work. So at the core, resilience is about how do we weather this VUCA environment that we're in? How do we take care of ourselves in order to take care of others, which then leads to this picture. So when we flew, you guys remember, you would hear the flight attendant at the front, standing front, middle of the plane, and he or she would say, in the event of turbulence, in the event we lose oxygen, if the face mask drops, put it on yourself first and then put it on someone else. And that's what it is to be resilient. That's what it is to belong. You're creating social connections. You're creating an environment where people are helping each other. And at the heart, that's what it is to belong within your company, within your community, and to help each other. But you have to start with resilience. Next slide. With that backdrop, and so when Charlene introduced me, I don't know if you said my whole title or not, but I can tell you that my title has about 100 letters in it. I actually counted one day, so I don't use the whole thing. But you'll notice that I have the work of diversity, equity, inclusion, corporate responsibility, civic affairs, and also the foundation. So you ask yourself, why? Why are those things linked? So much of what we do inside an organization is also reflective of what we do outside that organization, how our people are engaged and working in the communities in which they live, work, and play. The work that we do, our strategy around diversity, equity, and inclusion is not a separate thing. It is a thing that is incorporated throughout our entire organization and aligned to, as I said, to our corporate social responsibility, to our environmental, social, and governance work, and to the work of our foundation. So who we are inside is also reflective of what we do outside. So that's what you see when you see that linkage. The work that we do drives systemic, purposeful, and that is so important to keep that word in mind, that it's purposeful and that it is lasting. That's the work of diversity today. And that's so important, as I mentioned earlier, with the work that we're seeing across the world. There was a quote in Forbes not too long ago that said, purpose-driven companies attract the best minds, have the most passionate consumers, achieve wild success, and change the world. And so when you couple that with the work that I just mentioned about belonging, imagine the power of your company and what you can do. So this hits at the heart of our mission, and we see our role very clearly as being a driving force for change, for health equity and equality, not only across our industry, but across society as a whole. Next slide. So when you look at this slide, I could spend an hour just on this slide. I know I only have 30 minutes, but I think what's important to note on this slide is that when we talk about, and we as a company talk about social determinants of health all the time, and what are those things that are keeping people from being healthy, and health includes physical health as well as mental health. And again, that sense of belonging, resilience falls into that area. But 80% of an individual's health is determined by factors that are environmental. It's about where you live, work, and play. 20% are aligned to your health factors, right? Going to your doctor, taking care of yourself, all of those other factors. But what's important, and I want to throw out a couple of stats because I don't know if we always look at this in this way. When you think about these environmental factors in the world that we're living in, and the world, as I mentioned, those three pandemics that we're experiencing, the reality is that Blacks and Latinos are 3.8 times more likely and 1.5 times more likely than whites to die of COVID. We've all heard these stats. I don't know why we're sometimes surprised by the reality of the worlds that we're living in. Poor nutrition causes 45% of deaths in children under the age of 5. I want you to think about that number for a minute. Lack of access to good, nutritious food, 45% of deaths in kids under 5. A lack of transportation is a major obstacle to healthcare. Not just I live in St. Louis, Missouri, not just in St. Louis, Missouri, but across the world. Loneliness, and we're seeing this play out more and more every day as we think about kids not being in their school environments and what's happening, and we're seeing suicide continue to increase. Loneliness is an epidemic in this world right now. And if we don't help to create that sense of belonging within our communities, we're going to see that escalate. And then another factor, which I think is so important to talk about, is that there are ways that we can help mitigate diabetes and obesity and heart disease, which are three major factors in the African American community as well as within the Hispanic community, by access, by transportation, improvements in health, in housing, environmental factors that we don't always think about. Those are those 80% that I talk about. This should come as no surprise, but health disparities stem from systemic racism and discrimination. That's one of the pandemics that I mentioned earlier. And beyond a human rights issue, racism and discrimination are truly healthcare issues, and they take a toll on an individual's personal, physical, mental, spiritual, emotional well-being. At Cigna, we're doing all we can to help improve health equity for all. So next slide, please. All right, that slide has a lot on it. And so earlier I heard Charlene say that I was going to talk about two programs in particular. And this program that you see on here is called, and we love acronyms, so forgive me if I do that, but it's called the Building Equity and Equality Program. So immediately after George Floyd and all of the other social unrest that we experienced in 2020, we, like other companies, said we have to amplify the work that we're doing in diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we created many platforms. And in fact, some of this work is available for our customers and our colleagues on our site. But we accelerated and amplified our work in many ways. We had what many of you had, which were called courageous conversations for our employees. Within a short period of time, and I know I'm going to get the number wrong, but we had touched probably 10 to 12,000 of our employees within a 3 to 4 month period. We also did client events, or did a client event in order to touch our clients as well. We rolled out unconscious bias training to all of our employees. We implemented for the first time diverse candidate slates that required all external candidate posted openings from a certain level to have diversity of slate. We created new solutions and initiatives to support our customers, our clients, and our communities. And then we launched a program, as I mentioned, called Building Equity and Equality. This is a 5-year initiative, and it's really focused on that alignment of what we do inside as well as what we do outside. It's the connection of our employees to our communities. And it's also really focusing on, again, some of the work I talked about a second ago on the social determinants, but health, well-being, peace of mind, and governance. And I'm sure we're sitting out these slides, so I'm not going to read through all of this. But part of that offering of this Building Equity and Equality program is that we did some work with Magic Johnson in LA, where we are helping minority-owned businesses, female-owned businesses, in terms of how do they get into the pipeline. We partnered with Howard University with some work that we're doing around urban superintendents. So many of my team members are on this call today, and they know that I talk a lot about healthcare and education. Those two things are not disparate. Those two things go hand in hand to me. How do you have a strong educational system without an awareness of healthcare? So you have to talk about them at the same time. We also, for those of you who are partnering with CEO Action, we actually have our first fellow who's part of the CEO Action Fellowship, Racial Equity Fellowship Program. And we're continuing to develop very individualized programming for some key cities that we know are experiencing COVID at higher rates than other cities. So we're looking at those and creating, as I said, very individualized kind of partnership plans. That's how we connect diversity, equity, our communities, and our giving in one platform. We're proud of all of this work, but we have more to do. And I'm sure many of you on this phone would agree. We actually are launching in the next 2 weeks an enterprise-wide diversity council that will be led by my boss, the head of HR, as well as the CEO. That's huge. And that shows that our commitment to diversity is starting top down, sideways, bottom up. Everyone is involved in the discussion. We will continue to have these, what I call courageous conversations, our inclusive conversations. We've also brought in thought leaders to have this conversation with us. We're deepening our discussions with our employees, and we have one of our functions just launched what they're calling an enterprise-wide diversity commission, and that term was intentional because they are committed to doing and making a change within their area. And we will continue to adapt, evolve, adopt wherever and whenever we have to, because this work does not stop. This is not a moment. We are building momentum. Next slide. So no matter what you say, no matter what you do, you've got to start with an awareness and an understanding of self. That's where that resiliency comes in. That's where that acknowledgement of who I am. And by the way, we do a mosaic that's called Who I Am. And we allow our employees to list the things that make them unique, make them different, make them who they are. And we do that on our intranet, our internal site. But you have to listen, you have to reflect, and you have to act. So what do? Where do you start to listen? So many times we all listen to react as opposed to listen to learn. And that's what we have to start with. And you have to start with that awareness and understanding of self. You have to know what's true to you and to your organization. That starts with being purposeful, being intentional, being thoughtful, paying attention to what's around you, understanding where your organization is in the journey in order to move forward. All of us are not in the same places within our organization. And what I hear often is that many people say, well, we have to start with training. Well, you could, but if you don't have an awareness and understanding of what it is to be diverse, what it is to be inclusive, and what equity is, then it is difficult to start with training. You have to start with where you are in your organization. You have to understand what your employees, what your organization's needs are. And sometimes you have to simply do and sit and listen and not make judgments, not make assumptions, just listen. And then also ask yourself, what challenges are you facing? What challenges is your workforce facing? What challenges are you trying to mitigate within a community? For us, it's aligned to healthcare. It's also aligned, as I said a minute ago, around education. It's really bringing awareness and education to the forefront in order to make change. Understand, broaden your understanding and experience of others. And again, that's where you start with listening. We do a summit on an annual basis that's called Experience Diversity, and it truly is about storytelling. It's really around understanding the experiences of others so that you can be better and help to make change. When it comes to building a more diverse and inclusive workforce, you have to start looking within as well as outside, understand your communities. So start building those relationships and those partnerships. So how are you working with, as I mentioned, CEO Action? How are you building those other relationships? Think about programs like Caliber, our HRC Foundation. Those are just a few, but there are so many more. Build those really deep relationships so that they can help you in terms of how do you move forward within your organization. And then act. What are the resources? Have those. We heard very, very often when right after George Floyd, we had a lot of employees and a lot of leaders who were afraid to have conversations. You cannot be afraid. You have to have those conversations. And sometimes you have to acknowledge as leaders that you don't have the answer. Show your vulnerability in order to help your employees. Listen to learn. And then when I say that, then find those resources that can help you, your individuals, and your companies, but just learn to listen first. And then again, starting with, as I said, those kind of key check-in moments. Pay attention. Pay attention to what's going on in the world around you. As I mentioned before, we should not be surprised when we see what's happening with COVID, when we think about the communities and we think about vulnerable populations. None of us should be surprised when we're seeing African Americans and Hispanics dying at higher rates or being infected at higher rates because of what I mentioned before, the environments of sometimes what we're seeing around us. When people don't have access to healthcare, if they don't have access to transportation, or they don't have access to food, we shouldn't be surprised when we see some of the health inequities that we're seeing. And then you have to be flexible. And really, as I mentioned before, start with that understanding of self, start with that understanding of what it is to belong and to feel excluded in a workplace, because we know that happens. We're seeing it less, obviously, with how do you connect through this virtual world that we're in. And oh, by the way, it has been lots of fun for many of us and how we connect, but make sure that you're doing that outreach. It may be more difficult to do right now, but find that time and those ways to connect to those around you. And then my parting words, as I go, I can't believe I actually got through all of this. My parting words are that diversity and equity create space for everyone to succeed. That everyone is not just internal, but external as well. Understand your community and understand your individuals around you. What are the needs? So diversity and equity create space for everyone. Embracing inclusion, and this is the more difficult piece, allows us to create a better world for everyone around us. So with that, I'm going to open it up to questions. I think we may have some time.
We do. Just hopping back off of mute. Thank you so much, Susan. We do have a question from the audience that came in from Gina asking, will any of these program offerings be available to the community?
So Gina, good question. And yes, and so on Cigna.com, we do have some resources available, and I'm looking for the link, but we will make sure that we send that out, because we actually created a platform called We Stand Together, where many of these resources, lots of resources, are available to our customers or clients so that they can utilize them. So yes, we do have those. Thank you.
Perfect,
better
thank
together.
you.
I said we stand together. It's actually better together. Somebody on my team just texted me. So it's better together.
We'll make sure we can post that in the chat for everyone to see in real time as well, Susan. So we'll get that over to the group. Have a couple other questions here because we do have some time. And I'll read it off here. So we heard that COVID-19 is the great equalizer to describe how working from home can help level the playing field between all levels of the workforce. At the same time, we also heard that we've seen how the pandemic has exacerbated the systemic inequalities that many, people of color, women, different generations struggle against. So even in the best of times, can you share your thoughts on this and what you're doing at Cigna to support your workforce?
So remember I said the check-in, right? So number one, we know that women, so I'm going to start with people of everyone is experiencing this, but women are experiencing it at higher rates. Sorry, guys. But we're seeing women are actually getting out of the workplace. because of some of the issues that are coming as a result of COVID, right? Taking care of home, taking care of self, taking care of community, taking care of family. That's adding a lot of pressure. So what we're doing is, what are those check-ins? What are the needs? So what I may need in my career may be very different, Charlene, than what you need in your career. And the only way that you're going to get to that answer is to go back to what I said, listen to understand, listen to learn. Let's talk to you to really find out what your needs are. So you may decide, and again, I'm using you because I can see you, Charlene, but you may say, hey, Susan, it is really difficult for me to work from 8 to 5, a normal time frame. So I'm saying, let's talk about what are some opportunities for you in terms of time and when you can work to get the work done. I think we have to learn to be flexible. And what this has done is taught all of us. Guys, I'm old school, right? This has taught me to be really, really flexible with technology, really flexible with time, really flexible with the end result is how do we get the work done? Not when do we get the work done. So hopefully that answered it, because it is exasperating it in terms of what is happening. And I also think that this is opening up for some of us to be much more flexible than we have ever been in our careers, because we're realizing that everyone's needs are different. And that is truly the heart of being inclusive and breaking down those barriers.
I mean, absolutely, absolutely. It's a tough time for all, and we're kind of getting hit from multiple angles here. So a lot to absorb. I wanted to throw in this question from you. What are the key elements of a sustainable DE&I culture?
So, you know what? I wish I had that, and I wish I had known the answer like 20 years ago, right? So the reality is that goes back to it, and I don't want to make it simple. I know that we often talk about diversity and we forget to talk about the fact that we are all diverse. Everything about me is my diversity. I think an awareness and understanding of the issue is not diversity. The issue is creating an environment that my diversity is not held against me. And that's that inclusiveness. And so it's really having an awareness and understanding of what it is to be diverse and inclusive, and to create an environment that's equitable. And I notice I said equitable, not equal. That's intentional. And that in order to do that, first we have to have an understanding and awareness of who I am, what I'm looking for. So understand what it is to be diverse, and then create, again, as I said, an environment where my diversity is not held against me. I'm allowed to be who I am every single day. That's how you build sustainability. Start with understanding of diversity, and then really focus on inclusiveness. And that's much more difficult. That's why I said embracing inclusion creates a world, a safe space for everyone.
And as you're speaking, Susan, we have questions that are coming in. Let me go through these very briefly. I believe this might have come in from Kimberly, but it says, Susan, as we are working with our people managers in development, is there a specific book you would recommend around this topic that we could use in a book club style? I love that question. Sorry to put you on the spot, Susan. We can always send it after.
I know, Kimberly. All right, so Kimberly, there are books all around me, and I can't think of anything right off the top of my head, but here's what I would say. So Kimberly, when we send out the link, on our platform, Better Together, we actually created an entire book list of books that you should read. So without going through all of those, and there are many, but then also there are some books, Kimberly, that would be helpful just to have an awareness of some of the basics of what I was talking about now. What is it to be diverse? What is it to be inclusive? So some of those, so Charlene, if you could kind of help make sure that I'm connected to Kimberly. But at the end of the day, Kimberly, we actually created an entire list of books that an organization can have. So I was like, what am I reading now? I don't know if I'm going to share that. So that's the other thing I will share. Remember what I said about we have to find our own place of resilience. So I made a commitment that I was going to try to read 52 books this year, a book a week. I'm a little behind. So some of those are good, and some of those are not things I'd share on this link right now. So, all right.
No, thank you, Susan. Didn't mean to put you on the spot, but it's a great question. We'll definitely send out the resources for sure. I'd like to squeeze in just one more question before we have to end your session, Susan, and move on with our next keynote for today. And this is probably a really good one. How are programs like Building Equity and Equality helping you keep DEI and community impact at the top of your company's agenda?
So remember, I said it's DEI, it's ESG, and it's community. So if you think about what are the topics that boards are talking about, what are topics that CEOs are talking about, it's DEI and it's ESG. Those are top of mind for stakeholders. Those are top of mind for shareholders. Those are top of mind for your employees. I believe that this is, as I said, it's not just a moment in time. We have to continue to build off of that. So to keep that top of mind, that's my job. That's the job of my team. But I also know that our investors are asking the same questions. They're asking us what we're doing and how we're doing it, and they're holding us accountable in a way that they've never held us accountable before.
Wonderful. Susan, I wish we had more time. We have some more questions coming in, so I'd love to send those to you after your session so that you have the information. And I would encourage the group, if you have further questions, go to the lounge. We have our speakers listed there, and there you can send a message. And if you have some other questions that pop into your head, we'll make sure we get that to Susan, and we'll make sure that we'll get Susan's resources to all of you. So again, Susan, I have to say goodbye, but thank you so much for taking the time. We greatly appreciate it. And we have seen a lot of wonderful comments here in the virtual platform, and we'll be sure to share all of that with you.
Perfect. Thank you.